Good morning, Sandy.
Amy, hello.
Hello. Happy podcast day.
Happy podcast day to you. I've been having fun watching you doing all kinds of amazing things all over the place. Social media is a beautiful thing. Are you
It
a
is
busy
a beautiful
person?
thing. Yes, it's been very fun getting to see all of my colleagues from around the world because we had our NAPO conference, which I'm president of the association, and we had international visitors from
Right.
all over, and then all the Americans that were there and Canadians. And oh my gosh, it was just a fun gathering. But today we're going to talk about defensiveness.
Uh-huh.
And I love this topic because being president of the association and being in front of everybody, um, people tend to give me feedback.
Right.
Okay. And give the board feedback on things they don't like. And he had set this topic before I went to the summit. And, but I kept thinking about it the whole time I was there of,
Nice.
oh, I'm getting this feedback. What am I feeling right now? What is my reaction going to be? How do I like make the, how do I like handle this? So anyway, today we're talking about defensiveness.
Mhm. And mine came out of a place of coming back from vacation and sorry, coming back from vacation and having my phone blow up and text blow up and feeling like I was drawn to the emails where I had a sense of defensiveness because they didn't thoroughly read an email I had sent. They had lost one, communication breakdown. So I found myself gravitating toward the ones where my response would be one of defensiveness and wanting to answer those right away. And it made me think, why is my knee-jerk reaction to go toward and gravitate toward the things where I'm defending myself rather than thinking, okay, I'll deal with those later, which I think should be the way. The sky's not falling, right? It wasn't
Right.
because I wanted to set them straight that I had the
Yeah.
information or I don't want to say I was right, but to make sure that they're correctly informed. So,
Right.
I've been thinking about it too, Amy, and your comment about NAPO, I'm the president of the Chamber of Diplomats,
Mhm.
and I find myself again gravitating toward making sure that the negative feedback is dealt with rather than thinking about the positive and the great
Mhm.
things, which is about 10 times more than the defensive feedback, right? Or the
Right,
defensive
exactly.
response.
Yeah, so true. But yes, there was so much positive stuff, that so much positive feedback. And but there were those little, and typically from people who had held leadership positions before. So there were a bit of influencers in the association. And there was a situation that popped up, and it was kind of funny. I had just gotten off the stage. Something had happened that was against policy. It wasn't something that I had done, but we have a policy, and this policy was violated when somebody else was on the stage. Okay, one of the past presidents popped up to me, and the first thing she said was, "We have a policy about that, and that should not have happened." And my thought was, my knee jerk reaction, now I had just gotten off the stage, was, well, go talk to them about it. I am not dealing with it. Like, I was this is crazy. I'm not like, what do you do now? Like, I'm just like, and I just completely dismissed, and I sent him along his way. So,
And I,
and I say that because afterwards, that person walked away and looked like, okay, Amy's not taking this monkey. What am I going to do with this? I could see the brain going. And then I felt a little bad because it is an issue that we should address. But my first response was like, go to, I'm not
okay,
dealing with this.
so this is good. I like this build up. So I'm going to give you my example. They're
Okay.
similar, and then we'll dissect this. So
Okay.
president of the diplomats. And keep in mind, this isn't the Chamber of Commerce. This is the diplomats, the
Yeah.
ambassadors, and there's, you can have up to 40, and they have a reputation for being kind of a fun crowd, right? Because they like to go to ribbon cuttings. They're the ambassadors.
There's the celebrators. Yeah.
So my first meeting, I had a longtime member come up to me and say, this used to be fun. This isn't fun anymore. And I think his point was, used to be, not like it used to be last month and now you're the new president and now it's not today.
Yeah.
We used to have more fun times. And I tell you, part of it's COVID and we went from Zoom. There's a turnover in some of the fraternity. But my initial reaction was, I said, wow, sounds like an upward eval. And he sent me a text later and he said, I didn't mean that like personally, just with you. And, but my reaction was, and it was just like you, I'm just like you saying, I'm not going to deal with this. I'm like, sounds like an upward eval to me. And it kind of stopped him in his shoes.
Yeah.
Or in his tracks. But then later I thought, oh, do I regret it or don't I? And I tell you, Amy, you can't change the tone of what somebody else says, because it would have been nice for him to say, I've been in Rotary. I've been in the diplomats for a long time. And this is how it used to feel, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. This is the difference now, and explain to me, the differences. But I can't change his words, but I can change mine. So how should we both have reacted rather than defensiveness to those comments? Or were we okay in what we did?
I did okay. I will say that. And but I also recognize that this person caught me literally right after I had walked off the stage, like one of the first persons to get in my face. And that wasn't like, oh, Amy, you were on stage for an hour. Good job. I loved your message. There wasn't any of that. It was only about this policy exists for a reason, and it wasn't followed. And it was like so for me, it was a little bit of okay, poor timing on that person's poor timing for that person, but my reaction was not. And I will say I followed up with an apology, because what I should have just looked at this person and said, noted, I'll talk about it later. We can talk about it later, or something. Like that's what I felt like I should have done, instead of being go find someone else to complain to.
And I don't think the problem with defensiveness is it doesn't solve the situation, because that person, whomever, wants to be heard and defend, just like throwing back, you didn't read the email, or here's the fight. The defensiveness isn't going to resolve the issue. And I'll tell you, us talking about this and me thinking about it, I was gone for the next meeting and the same person made the comment. I wasn't there. And who was standing in for me, and they felt kind of bad about it. They're like, oh my gosh, I must have done a bad job. And I shared, no, I got the same feedback, and here's what I said. I feel kind of bad about it. I'm going to go back to this person and say, help me understand what's changed, and then help me understand what we can do.
Yeah.
What are your suggestions? What can we do to get back there? Help me understand how you're feeling and what you want. Because the other side is, there's two sides too, back to what they should have said. I also get feedback from other people saying people talk over each other. We have a guest that's talking and there's laughing and not paying attention. And if that's fun, that's rude, right? It's not respectful. So part of it is unwinding, what does this mean? And then saying, I'm all for it, but I'm also not a comic. So tell me what you need from me, right? What do we need? You already have wine, you have beer, but I need to hear them out and ask the question. Rather than being defensive, I need to say, help me understand.
I love that, because I think that's key, but I think it's hard in the moment
not
to take things because I do in that moment when that person brought up the policy, because I'm kind of one of the people that's responsible for making sure we're following the policies. Like I've studied them, so I should know. But so I felt like someone called me out on something I should have taken care of, even though it wasn't even part of, I had no idea until this other person was on the stage. Like I saw it happen in real like everybody else. And so it was a little like, okay, it happened. What do we do? Like, but the person came straight at me, but I felt like it was a personal attack. And I think that's the key, because that's when when I take things personally, I tend to react instead of just be like, okay, but it escalates the problem when you react, because then the other person is not happy with our response, obviously. And so when I feel like when we get defensive, the other person a lot of times will dig in their heels and be like, all right, this is a problem and this person's not taking care of it. So I got to dig in my heels and be a louder voice.
And probably going to other people and stirring it
Yes.
up.
And that's exactly what I saw happen with this was I saw this person walk away and the brain was spinning and it was like, okay, who do I go to now? Because Amy is obviously not going to listen to me. And so that's why I felt when I kind of saw that, I was like, okay, I need to rein this in and make sure it doesn't escalate to a bigger issue.
Mhm. And you made a good point when I brought up this topic before NAPO and before I thought about the chamber. I was talking about responding to the email and I was using an example, and you said, wow, you went from defense to offense. That's actually going on the offense.
Yeah.
I think it's good to remember too, sometimes when you start in a place of defense, you actually do start getting offensive, back to,
Yeah.
I made the comment, yes, I was defensive, but I was a little offensive about it too. Or responding to an email saying, I already sent it. I'm going to re-forward this email. Didn't
Yeah.
you read this? Right?
Yeah.
There's definitely a strong hint of offensiveness with that too.
Yeah. Right. So that makes me think of Trump. He was arrested yesterday and went from being defensive to offense and attacking. And like it was a complete, which does not make the situation better. It just makes it muckier and uglier instead of, I liked your thought of going to the person who's kind of a, and I'm going to say it feels like an attack at least. And like you said, and asking, okay, tell me what this is and what are the opportunities to do something different so I understand better.
And, for you, maybe it was great point. Can we talk about this later?
Right.
Point
Exactly.
noted. Totally get it.
Noted.
We'll talk about this later.
Yeah.
I'd like to, even with me, if you feel like you're getting defensive, or when defensive is marked with either a hint of offense or emotion, it's better to put it aside because it's not bad. Back to playing defense. Sometimes you need to defend other people or defend policies. Defending is not a bad thing, but I think it's when it's marked with emotion or a bit of offensive punchback, right?
Yeah.
It's bad. And back to asking for, if I felt when he made that point to me a little bit emotional, not, emotional about it, that I had to snap back. Because when I told Garrett I made that comment, he said, wow, it's like you did a little neutering there, because I had it. Which, hey, I've been between having brothers and working with men.
Right.
I got to tell
Yeah.
you, as a female around men, you do have to be a little bit more vocal because it's a posturing thing, right?
Yeah.
It can be. And so I have this knee-jerk reaction to posture myself. I think that's part of just my history and my journey is I've learned how to take control back in a room And I got to watch that knee jerk reaction because I mean, at the end of the day, it's the diplomats and he makes it. I'm sure, my meetings are not as much fun as they used to be. I think it's a very good point. I don't know how to resolve it and I need that, but I also don't understand because I wasn't around at that time period using that example.
Right, right, right. And do you remember the book that we read, Thanks for the Feedback?
Yes.
Yes. I want to resurrect that book because that was a really good book about how to give feedback and how to receive feedback. That was part of it. And they, I remember I think it was two people who wrote the book, right?
Yes.
And there was a whole section on defensiveness. And I don't have it with me because I'm traveling, but I will say if anybody's looking for better ways to give feedback so people don't feel defensive and attacked and also better to receive, I just want to bring that little thing back up.
Mm-hmm. Very
Um,
good point. They did a very good job of talking about it. So I need to reread that
yes,
chapter.
I know. I was like, I keep thinking I need to reread that. I will say there was one point in my experience at conference where there was a group of people gathered in a social type of situation, and I joined them later as they had been sitting around chatting, and I kind of walked up and say, "Hey, how are you guys doing?" and started visiting, and one of them had feedback on the some negative feedback and said, everybody raise your hand if you think this. And the whole group raised their hand in agreement with this negative feedback. As I was standing right there, it was directed towards me. And I just was like, wow, this is kind of aggressive, instead of like, I just want to tell you, I have the and all these people agree with me. So, and then they were totally silent. They all raised their hand and I'm like, I didn't say anything because I'm like, I'm not gonna engage in this right here. So I was like, when I
That
walked
was a
away from
great
the
response,
situation,
actually.
well, when I walked away, I was like, good job, Amy, just keeping your mouth shut. Because I was like, I'm not going to defend anything. I'm not gonna, but it was a really hard, I felt attacked. I really felt attacked. And I didn't, I, I, I just didn't know what to do with it. I was like, I don't know what to say
And,
because it's
and
going to get ugly really fast if I say something.
right. And responding because first of all, picking apart the other side is if you feel some way, a certain way, it should have been a one-on-one conversation. And secondly, for some reason, that person needed the affirmation of it's not just me, it's everyone else, which is never a good.
Yeah.
That's a second tier, back to signing a petition because you're not being heard, right? It
Yeah.
usually isn't a great initial approach to something.
Yeah.
And if that was the approach, you did the best answer of nothing. And if it really meant something, come back with, they should come back with something specific, back to identifying what a problem is, potential resolutions, and dealing with it one-on-one. Now, will you go back to that person and ask more one-on-one, or are you just going to leave it?
I'm going to leave it because it felt a little bit like a mean girl situation. That's
Okay.
what it felt like. And so I'm like, I'm not going to engage in this conversation with
Right.
this person. I will take that little nugget. I mention it to some of the board members and see if it's something that we want to adjust or change. But I'm not going to say who it came from. I'm not going to say because I don't want to elevate it. I don't want to say there was a whole group of people, but it felt like a mean girl situation. That's what I felt like. I felt like I was in high school and I was being ganged
And
up
the
on.
best thing to do with situations like that is walk away from them. So we have to
Yeah.
deal with that. And then the other side is back to my point on men. We have to deal with some things sometimes with the men with posturing,
Yes.
because if it was a guy that was putting on the meeting, I don't think he would go up to the guy and say, I'm not having fun anymore. Or this is, I think that would almost be embarrassing. You know, would a guy go up to a guy and say, this isn't fun anymore? Would they? I don't think so.
So, Sandy, I come from the same generation and background as you.
Mhm.
So sometimes I agree. Sometimes it feels like as females, people feel more entitled to give feedback because there's less respect, or maybe they think women are more swayable with their feedback than men. I don't know what it is, but it does feel like men, because I have a man on my board, on the board of directors, and he doesn't hear all the chatter that I hear and the other board members. Like, people just don't give him all the feedback that they give the rest of us, which is just fascinating to me. I'm like,
Right.
he's in the exact same position, but they don't feel.
And your
And
point about Mean Girls, you know, I went and had a lunch with a director of a not for profit, and she wants to start a women's group. And, you know, how sad we are talking about pros and cons, but men so naturally help each other out. And it's interesting how we have to sometimes reiterate we're here to lift each other up rather than try to work through those little pockets of mean girls that are more inclined to add drama, be negative. And it's like, can't we just lift each other up naturally instead of having to weed people out or having to reiterate the purpose of what we're doing? It just makes things a lot more difficult
it
when it
does.
shouldn't be.
Yeah.
A lot more vetting happens. That's the point of our whole conversation, is we had to do extra layers of vetting and rules to make sure that didn't happen, even though, of course, most of the women were absolutely going to be a great part of this group and help each other out. But I thought, what a sad world that we have to take these extra steps to do the vetting and to make sure that these situations don't occur. It shouldn't be like that.
It should not be like that. I found an article that I'm going to put in the show notes, and it's all about what is defensiveness and how what is the title? How it becomes a vicious cycle. And one of the parts of this article is how to recognize defensiveness, because I think some we don't even realize we're being defensive.
Mhm.
And things like blaming the other person for what they're criticizing you for. So there's something that comes up, but it's really their fault
Right.
that this is a problem and it's not my fault. Accusing the other person of being defensive. That's they're being so defensive. That's you being defensive.
You being defensive.
Justifying your actions. So this one was hard for me because I do feel like when somebody, like all those examples I gave, when somebody's giving you feedback and you share your what the intention was or why you did it,
Mhm.
I always feel like I'm trying to give clarity and understanding. I don't feel like I'm being defensive, but I guess it is being defensive.
Yeah, because you're justifying, and I do that all the time, honestly, Amy. So
Well,
back to justifying, here's
and
why,
I'll justify.
here's, I mean, think about it. Really, me making my comment on, well, you know, we can't talk over other people. We have to be respectful. Really, I'm justifying. And I bring that up every time I bring up this example. Well, we can have fun, but we need to be respectful. So
Right,
I'm
exactly.
justifying not being fun.
Yeah.
But
Right, yeah.
in the end, it's a balance because we're human. We have these natural reactions, and we want everybody to enjoy the conference, to think it's great. You know, we all have a bit of pleasers in us. And unfortunately, there are a few people that aren't pleasers that just have a little bit of fun with the ruckus, right?
Right.
Um, and we're going to have to manage our way through that. But the defensiveness, it doesn't even feel good, when you're done. If I go back to my example, the initial one of the email, and I thought through this a little bit, like it happens all the time in communication because of emails. People do not read their emails. They forget their attachment. There's too many, and they looked at the wrong one. So they looked at the wrong set of financials, or they missed one piece. There's a lot of communication that can break down in email chains, right? And getting defensive, they didn't read this, or I gave them this, using that example, gets nowhere. And the reality is, I can't care more than they do. So the only one getting worked up is me, because if they truly didn't care enough to read it to begin with, getting defensive and telling them you should have read this, they're not going to care anymore that time anyway.
Right.
And Garrett uses that phrase with me all the time. You can't care more than they do. And he'll use that with my kids, right? Or somebody else, you're trying so hard to make this perfect, but you're caring more than they do, and that makes no sense. Why? What are you trying to prove to somebody who's not caring as much as you do?
Right. Right. That is so true. I love that. You can't care more than they do.
So like if I'm trying, use the kids as an example, he uses that with me. If I'm like, oh, they've got to get the car registered. Oh my gosh, I'm going to go on my list. I'm going to do this.
Yeah.
He's like, you can't, if you care more than they do,
Yeah.
you're not teaching them anything. You're not, the only one stressed is you.
And the responsibility is on you.
It's right. And the same thing
done.
happens with coworkers or, blah, blah, blah. If you're caring more than they do and it's their problem or their weight, why are you doing it?
Yeah. So I love that point, because that makes you stop and pause on resolving stuff. But here's a really good question to overcome defensiveness is, how is my defensive behavior impacting the resolution of this conflict? And that really hits home, like, okay, am I resolving something, or am I escalating by attacking or reacting or whatever that thing I'm doing in response to the feedback? And so I thought that was
I love that. That's a great one. And using that with both of our, our various situations that we talked about. So back to me going back and saying, okay, help me understand what it used to be like.
Yeah.
Tell me the difference and how do we resolve it? Let's just say there's no feedback given on here's a resolution, but that point keeps coming up. Okay. There's nothing I can do at this point, right? Yeah. Or with yours, taking it back to the board, and the person keeps complaining about it, right? Why even be defensive?
Right. Yeah. Right. Exactly.
Easier said than done.
Right. Isn't that the truth? So there were a couple of people that were in charge. Well, there was a team of people that was in charge of organizing the conference this year. And lots of changes were made. And one of them told me her response for the whole weekend or the week, whatever. I think it started on Monday. She started back. She said, "Thanks for the feedback." And she's like, that is all I'm saying for this whole weekend. I am not engaging in any conversations. I'm just going to say thanks for the feedback. And then I'm moving on, and then I'll decide what to do with the feedback. But
I like that.
I would like to follow up with her and see how that went for her, because I saw her like in the middle of the week. I didn't see her at the end of the event. So I'm curious how that played out, if she was able to maintain that response, because that's hard. I think it's valid, but I do think it's also hard to just respond. Thanks for the feedback.
And I think it's really hard. I think it's valuable too, because if you wait and say, thanks for the feedback, my next step would be, okay, I got the feedback. Does it really matter? Are they going to come back again? Or is it big enough that I need to make a note and follow through? But I think it gets back to putting it back on them too, to say, don't be defensive and say, okay, you gave this, see if they still feel strongly about it. And then say, ask for their suggestions, right?
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's a good ad, Sandy. Thanks for this feedback. What do you suggest?
What do you suggest? Great
And
feedback. What do
then,
you suggest? It's
right,
because it's so easy to just, make a claim, you know,
right.
using email as an example, purely just send the email that was missed and say, I think this one was, make sure you read this email through,
Yeah.
see what they do with
Right.
it, right? Don't
Right.
reiterate, don't, and
Yeah.
back to ask the question, what do you suggest?
Yeah.
And be open to trying different things, right? If you're going to
Yes.
ask it, be open to listen. Don't be setting
Yes.
somebody up to say, see, you don't really know what you're talking about.
Yeah. 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 Oh, and the other piece of this is if you're going to give somebody feedback, what I would say is assume positive intentions.
Mm-hmm.
Like there is typically reasons why things are the way they are. They're not creating situations just to irritate you and just to make things different. There's usually reasons why. So understanding that and maybe that's a better question is giving feedback on the things, saying, so I'm curious why this has changed and what the reasoning is, instead of saying, I like it better the old way. So, having a constructive
Right,
conversation.
right.
Yeah. All right. I know we're running late on time, so we should probably wrap up.
Okay.
Always fun chatting with you on these topics. So,
Now we got
okay.
to live it, Amy, right?
I know we gotta live it,
We got
right?
this.
Nothing done. So, what's the real and the ideal?
The real is the situations are always going to happen where you're going to feel like you're going to want to be defensive. They're going to happen, and you can't change how other people approach things, what they say, how they say it, and they're going to keep happening. That we're going to feel that we have to defend ourselves.
Yes, I think we're going to continue to get feedback the rest of our lives.
Mm-hmm.
So the ideal would be just keeping an awareness of how you're responding and trying to elicit constructive feedback and not taking things personally.
And you don't have to do it right away.
Right.
You don't. So it isn't an either or. I'm going to be defensive or I'm going to take it all in. You can say thanks for the feedback and follow up later, because 50% of that might drop off because it was in the moment. Right. So you
And
don't have to respond right away.
I love that because especially when you're in the heat of the moment,
Mhm.
you can say, thanks for the feedback. Can you follow up with me later on that so that you have permission to absorb and pause? Good
Right.
advice, Andy. You're so smart.
Oh gosh. With that, I'm not going to be defensive. I'm just going to,
Soak
we'll
it
just
in.
be positive affirmations then.
All right.
All right,
Thank
Amy,
you.
until next week.
All right. Thanks, Andy. Bye.
Bye.